Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It's Saturday, April 4th. I guess by the time you guys are hearing this, it's probably going to be Sunday, April 5th. So happy Easter, if that's the case. Maybe even Monday the 6th, so you'll have to forgive me if that's the case. But long time no talk. I mean, what can I say? Similar to the Bulls and the Pacers and the Wizards and the Grizzlies, I've been mailing it in. I mean, what can I say? It's a very long 82-game season, right? It's hard to be locked in for 8 months or however long the season is. But the important thing is that we're back now, and we're back in what's been a really wild week in the NBA. And as you can tell by the title of today's episode, what we're going to focus on today's podcast is going to be the incredible game. Finally, a meaningful and really entertaining NBA game that we had earlier today between the Denver Nuggets and the Spurs. Jokic versus Wemby. It was a lot of fun. We also need to talk about what's been an awful week for the Los Angeles Lakers. And at the end of this podcast, I want to narrow it down a little bit, right? With all these teams, all these storylines floating around in the NBA, I want to just quickly zoom in on what I believe is the real NBA title contenders. I'd be pretty shocked if the NBA title in 2026 ends up going to a team that's not one of the few teams that we're going to be talking about at the end of today's episode. But before I get into all that, I do want to touch on a bunch of different random headlines that I haven't had the opportunity to talk about in these last few weeks without a podcast episode. And we should start off with talking about NBA expansion, right? There's been a lot of NBA expansion news, and I'm just going to give you guys the spark notes. I'm sure there's other longer form podcasts out there for you guys that really want to dive into the expansion stuff. But what it sounds like is that if the league is going to expand, what we do know is that the two teams would be Las Vegas and Seattle. I really don't see a world in which they expand by one team, bringing us to 31 total teams. I don't think that makes a ton of sense. So it's either going to stay the same with the 30 teams that we currently have, or we're going to add two new teams in Las Vegas and Seattle. The NBA is really pushing it. They clearly want this. They clearly want two more teams. They clearly want the additional income that would come from bringing in two new franchises to the league. But the real holdup is going to be with the owners, right? I do think that we've gotten a lot smarter, a lot more business savvy in the last 40 years or 30 years, really the last time we got an expansion team, whenever that was. And basically the deal for the owners is that if they are to expand, the league would cut a check that would go out to all other 30 NBA owners for somewhere in the ballpark of about $500 million. And that's kind of like a breakup of part of the fees that the league would be bringing in, right? Whatever the cost is, whatever these two new teams are purchased for, some of that money is going to be divvied out to all 30 other owners. Obviously, that's a nice little check for the owners to immediately recoup that money, take that short-term gain of $500 million. I mean, that's obviously quite impactful, but maybe not as impactful if you are an NBA owner and already have $1 billion sitting there in the bank. And I think a lot of these owners are a lot smarter in thinking that, hey, it might be some short-term gain if I take this check, we add two new teams to the league. But long-term, is it really the best for this franchise that I own if there's two more teams? You got to think down the road. You're cutting that media pie up a little bit further, right? All the media rights deals and how that is split evenly across all 30 teams. Now you're splitting that across 32 teams, so your cut's going to be smaller. And just competitively, it's going to be even more difficult to win an NBA title if there's two more teams that will eventually be competing for that title as well. So maybe some of the owners that are looking to sell within the next few years anyway are more likely to move forward and accept this push from the NBA to add two new teams, whereas ownership groups that are pretty firmly entrenched in their roles right now, maybe they want to decline or push back on the expansion for as long as humanly possible. So it's definitely not a certainty that we get two new teams, but there is a certainty that those two new teams would be Las Vegas and Seattle if the league is able to move forward with this expansion. And I think we'll know as soon as 2027, that's when we will have certainty around if there is going to be expansion, when the expansion draft would take place. And I should mention that in the past, when the NBA has expanded, they have had expansion drafts in which these two new franchises can pick players from all 30 other NBA teams to fill out their roster. Now, the caveat is that all of the other 30 NBA teams do have the ability to protect up to 8 different players in expansion drafts of the past. Now, there is no guarantee that a new expansion draft would function the same exact way, but I can't really think of any other way that these two new franchises would come about, so you can expect something similar to take place if we move forward with expansion. Now, if you're curious about my thoughts on it, I'm all for it. I think expansion would be great for the NBA. I personally think that the league has plenty of talent and more than enough talent to support adding 2 more NBA teams. I mean, you see it all the time, and especially at this point in the year where teams are emptying their benches and guys that are on like shorter contracts or guys that are in and out of the G League or guys that I've literally never heard of in my entire life, they get the opportunity to play in these NBA games that are largely meaningless, but still, there are guys every day going out there that I'm not even familiar with that are putting on a show, that have insane talent, insane ability, and they're just buried in the G League, buried at the end of these deep benches. And I think that the NBA is more talented than what it's ever been before. So I'm all for it. I think 32 teams to match the NFL is a nice round number. So it would be really awesome just for Seattle to get a team. I know I'm not the highest on Seattle after the Seahawks beat my Patriots in the Super Bowl, but by all accounts, it seems like they had a great fan base and they never should have lost the Sonics in the first place. And I know there's a lot of wounds out there that are unhealed from the team moving to Oklahoma City and then winning their first title in Oklahoma City last year. So I definitely feel for all the fans out there. I could really care less about the people of Las Vegas. I don't know if any real people actually live out there, what their deal is. They're getting sports teams left and right. So I don't know if Vegas is necessarily the next best market to get an NBA team, but we know that is a certainty as well. So let's move on to the next major NBA storyline that I've missed the past couple weeks, and that's tanking. It's happening a lot, and this obviously isn't a new phenomenon. It's certainly something that we've talked about before on this podcast, but I'd say there's at least, 8 to 10 teams that are not trying at all right now. None of this is unforeseen by any means, but would expansion help this tanking problem? No, it definitely wouldn't, and I feel like that's a lot of the reason why people are pushing back on expansion is like, hey, there's all this tanking and all this meaningless basketball that's taking place late in the regular season now, so how could the NBA possibly recommend expanding to even more teams where there's just 2 more teams out there that are going to be non-competitive to start? Look, I agree that expansion is not going to help tanking by any means. I'm just here to say, is it really as bad as people say, right? Like, there's 82 games. Most of these teams have not been tanking all year long. A lot of teams recently turned on the tank in the past few weeks or past few months. And while that's not great, all of these teams have some meaningful games and some exciting moments that the fans can cling on to from earlier in the season. And it's always this bad when you get into late March, early April. The real problem is that the season's just too long, and so inevitably, once you get right before the playoffs and so many teams have been eliminated, you're going to get a lot of meaningless basketball no matter how you cut it. And I know that I'm in a unique spot where I'm trying to follow all teams just for the sake of this podcast and being as knowledgeable as possible, but am I really that crazy for just being relieved to just like rule out teams like the Jazz and the Bulls and the Grizzlies? Like, okay, I don't have to watch the Grizzlies again until next year. I'm just going to stop watching them because they're not fielding a competitive roster right now. They are not trying to win, and that it's not worth my time. And even during these really awful slates where we've had a bunch of them, like I think last night, basically every single game except for one of them was meaningless games, and I think that only meaningful game was like between the Wolves and the Sixers, and even then that game was missing a few stars, and it wasn't all that exciting of a game anyway, and every other game was a blowout. Like, I get why that's frustrating, but even still, in the absolute slog of the NBA season right before the playoffs, if you look at a slate of 7 or 8 games, odds are at least 1 or 2 of the games is still going to be really good. There's still going to be 2 teams that are trying to win, that are still trying to play, in which all of us casual fans can throw that game on and be entertained. So because there are so many games, like inevitably you're going to get a few in there that are still good, even while all this tanking is going on. And by the way, there's a reason for this is happening. The reason that all these teams are tanking and trying to lose right now is that long term, they're trying to get better. And it's really the only way that these teams will ever get better is by tanking. I mean, this is supposed to be an absolutely loaded draft class. And it makes sense that if you can throw away a couple months of a season or most of a season to get a guy like a Darren Peterson or an AJ DeBanso or a Cam Boozer or whoever your favorite flavor at the top of the draft is, then you will do that in a heartbeat. You would do it for Wemby. You would do it for Cooper Flag. There's a reason that all these teams are doing this. And to be totally honest with you, I know it's really annoying with all the tanking teams right now, but it would be much more damaging for the NBA if there were just 10 teams like the Bulls instead. In which, yeah, they're like still trying to be competitive, but they don't really know how to field a competitive roster. They don't really know the ins and outs of team building, and they just remain in purgatory in this middle ground where they're extremely uncompetitive right now, and they're going to remain uncompetitive because they won't just pick a direction. And so you can say whatever you want about these tanking teams, but the reality is they're just doing what is best for the long-term future of the franchise. So maybe tanking a little bit underrated. I did just pull off a somewhat successful tanking zag, in my opinion, but all that to say, Adam Silver has come out and said that there are going to be significant changes coming. He has some plans for the offseason that he hopes will radically reduce the amount of tanking that we see. So we can definitely revisit this in the offseason and see what rule enforcements are made to change what this looks like at the end of the season. But as much as people like to bitch about it, I still think if you want to watch a team that's competitive like the Nuggets or the Spurs or the Celtics or whoever else most nights, you can still find at least 1 or 2 games in the slate to be entertained, even with this NBA product in the late regular season. Hard pivot here to a topic that I'm much less excited to talk about, but I did feel the need to at least mention the Jaden Ivey stuff that's going around right now, because it's gotten a lot of headlines from all different ends of the spectrum, so I just wanted to give you my 2 cents, and I do think, well, the story is pretty sad. We can't lose sight of that. It's also pretty simple, in my opinion. And to give you guys the spark notes, Jaden Ivey, he was a former, 5th overall pick in the draft a couple years ago by the Detroit Pistons. He had some injuries, and ultimately things didn't really work out in Detroit. He was kind of like the second banana of the cade for a lot of that time, and then he was coming off the bench, didn't really fit in with this year's squad, and was ultimately traded to the Bulls at the deadline. Now, I actually like the Bulls taking a swing on a guy like Ivey that could do a lot better in a second situation, but he wasn't all that good for the Bulls when he did play in limited games this year. Then he had a pretty significant knee injury that basically ruled him out for the season, and then recently he was released by the Chicago Bulls. Now, the real story here is that he has been online posting like hour-long, largely incoherent rants on, I think it's Instagram, it could be other forms of social media as well, I'm really not too sure. But he's been very outspoken, all of this in a public setting, again, on social media, and he shared some pretty controversial religious beliefs that ultimately are what the Bulls use to be like, hey, we don't necessarily agree with this message, we're going to let this guy go. I don't know exactly what the quote was from the Bulls. It doesn't matter. The guy got released. And now there are certain demographics that are now defending Jaden Ivey as some sort of figurehead, like, hey, guys should be able to celebrate whatever religion they want and have whatever religious beliefs they want. Like, why does he get released from the team for this? That's not the reason he got released from the team. He got released from the team because, unfortunately, he was a bad player with a really bad injury history who's also on an expiring contract, right? He's set to hit unrestricted free agency this offseason. There's no long-term commitment here from the Chicago Bulls. He was, in all likelihood, set to join another team anyways. And he's on this team. He's shut down for the rest of the season. The Bulls are already having enough heat thrown their way for being as uncompetitive as they've been for a really long stretch of time here. And you're going to have a guy that's not playing on the end of your bench anyway with no long-term commitment, and you're, as a front office and as a PR department, you're just going to allow him to just go on these crazy-ass rants on social media. Like, even if you don't think anything that he's said yet is controversial, which I would disagree with, but even if you're fine with everything he said so far, like, the real question, if you've seen even a few seconds of these clips, is like, what is he going to say next? No idea. It obviously is not worth the risk from the Chicago Bulls at that point. I completely agree with what was an obvious decision to cut the guy. So I think that's really it. I just wanted to call out that Jaden Ivey, despite being the 5th overall pick in the draft, for anyone that's not familiar with him, his career really hasn't panned out lately. A lot of that, not his fault, right? He's had some pretty unfortunate knee injuries here. But I think this is just a really sad story right now. There's clearly something up with the guy's mental health. So I hope that it turns around. But for anybody that's like coming at the Bulls because they made some controversial decision and let go of a guy because of his religious beliefs, it wasn't that. The guy's clearly going through a mental health episode as of right now, and with how much content he's putting out that's all public, it really was not worth the risk to keep him on the team. But again, he's still really young, so cautiously optimistic. Maybe something will change this offseason. He's got plenty of time to sort himself out before next year, and hopefully that guy gets what will be a third opportunity on a new NBA team. Moving on to the final headline before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, we have to talk about all of the hate that the NBA is getting, not for tanking, not for the Jaden Ivey stuff, but for the 65-game rule. So if you guys aren't familiar with this rule, just a quick reminder that in order for players to be considered for postseason awards, so like MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, First Team All-NBA, Second Team All-NBA, etc., you need to play in at least 65 of 82 regular season games. And I actually saw earlier the guys have to play at least like 15 or 20 minutes in these games too. Like, you can't just like appear in a game just to check a box for this rule. But long story short, it's had some really unexpected consequences this year because there are a ton of star players, and 3 guys in particular that would be absolute locks, in my opinion, for postseason awards that are now going to be coming just short of this 65-game threshold, which makes them ineligible. So let's go through the list real quick. We have to talk at the top, Cade Cunningham, a guy that was a lock for maybe even first team All-NBA with how well he's been doing. He had a collapsed lung a couple weeks ago and is probably going to be out the remainder of the regular season. That's a storyline within itself, and we'll talk more about the Pistons in a little bit, but huge bummer that Cade is not going to be eligible for these awards because he had an incredible season. To name some other stars, we have Steph Curry, Giannis, LeBron, Joel Embiid, Anthony Edwards as well, because of his knee soreness that kept him out a while. I believe he is now ineligible for postseason awards. That is a huge loss. That's a guy that definitely was going to be on an All-NBA team somewhere. And then a headline of this week is Luka, who just suffered a grade 2 hamstring strain. He had some injuries earlier in the season, and I think he's going to be exactly one game short of the 65-game threshold, which is a massive bummer. I'm not sure if that weird rule about playing in a certain number of minutes, maybe that affects Luka's case or something like that. But as far as I know, unless he somehow miraculously comes back from what's been a grade 2 left hamstring strain, so not great, unless he somehow comes back before the end of the regular season, I don't think Luka is going to be eligible either. So, long list of names. I think the headliners there are like Cade, Ant, and Luka. Those three in particular, it's a really tough scene. But I've always liked the rule. I mean, I was really excited when they put it in place. I just thought that the amount of games that star players would miss, and just feeling for the fans when you go to buy tickets, when you're buying and going to a Pistons game, you're expecting to see Cade Cunningham. You want to be there in the building for the stars. And with guys missing games left and right, I felt like this rule was a step in the right direction to incentivize star players to play. But the problem is that it has these unexpected consequences this year. And I think that as much as I've always defended this rule, I do think that they need to change at least the language about it, around it. Maybe there's, something for these unfortunate circumstances where maybe if there's like a minutes played threshold where you can hit 65 games or a certain number of minutes that would make guys like Cade and Ant and Luka eligible, maybe you drop the threshold down by just like a few games, you drop it to 62, you drop it to 60, something like that, where even still you have to play in 3/4 of the season to be eligible. That feels fair. Or maybe we even simplify it to give Adam Silver a little bit more power in this and just let him make exemptions of the 65-game rule. I'm just thinking about all the people that have votes for NBA awards, and even though I don't have a vote, I'm going to fill out a ballot, so to speak, and share it with you on this podcast as if I do have a vote. And I would love to just be able to count Luka and count Ant and count Cade to be eligible for these awards because I think they deserve it. And so if Adam Silver came out and was like, hey guys, I know Luka only played in 63 or 64 games or whatever, but if it's okay with you guys, I'm still going to make him eligible to win MVP or win first team All-NBA or anything like that. I don't think anybody would be upset with Adam Silver. Now, maybe he has taken enough heat for everything else the NBA is going through as of late where he doesn't want to take on that type of power, and especially doing that in like a public setting. Maybe he wouldn't go for that, but I would be completely comfortable with giving him the power to make a special exemption for these rules when it's guys that are obvious we're on the trajectory of being deserving of these awards. So I just want to throw it out there that I've always defended the 65-game rule. I'm still glad we have it. Like, I know it sucks for these three guys, but I'm glad it exists because it does help with getting guys to show up for games. I do think there's been an increased focus from the stars as of late, but even I have to admit they probably need to look at editing this rule in the offseason because this year it's a really tough scene of guys that just missed the cut that easily would have been locks to make at least an All-NBA team and maybe even some further awards beyond that. So let's move on and talk about the Los Angeles Lakers. I did just mention it before that Luka got hurt earlier this week. It was a grade 2 left hamstring strain, and this came in a game against the Oklahoma City Thunder on Tuesday night in which there was a lot of anticipation for that game. The Lakers were on fire heading into the matchup. They get absolutely blown out by the Thunder. Doors blown off, just a complete mismatch, and then Luka goes down with a terrible hamstring injury. So this hamstring injury is expected to keep him out at least through the end of the regular season. It's kind of tough if you look at other grade 2 strains. You're looking at between 2 and even 6 weeks with the chance of re-aggravation. So, best case scenario, maybe he misses a game or two of the playoffs and still comes back late round 1. Worst case scenario, he's missing at least all of round 1, maybe some of round 2 as well. That's a really tough situation for the Lakers. And the double whammy of bad news actually took place earlier today. Austin Reeves is going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with a grade 2 oblique strain. So that would put him at a mid-May return, right? Maybe early May, best case scenario. So you're looking at late round 2 for a potential Austin Reeves return as well. And I'd love to zag and say the Lakers still have a chance here, but I'm going to be honest with you. I really wasn't buying much Lakers stock to begin with. I've been kind of low on the team all year long, and I feel like their playoff chances have just been absolutely cooked. And it's really unfortunate because I will say, as much as I've been down on the Lakers all year, I can't deny how well they had been playing heading into this week of awful news. They were 17-6 since the All-Star break, which is tied for the fourth best record in the NBA during that time. Luka was basically averaging 40 points per game during the month of March. I think he actually did hit that number, or was within a point or two of that number if you take out the Thunder game where he got hurt on Tuesday night. Never really bought into Luka for MVP. I just felt like that push was too late, and unfortunately it's not going to matter for Luka anyways, because again, he's probably not going to be eligible for any sort of postseason award because he's not going to play in 65 games. But the Lakers were making a real case to be the third best team in the West, especially when Denver hit a lull a couple weeks ago when the Lakers were hitting their stride. But to be totally honest with you, I don't think I ever would have gotten there on the Lakers anyways, just because I feel like that loss against OKC, and while it was just a regular season game and maybe the Lakers just weren't up for it, I think it was a pretty legit indicator of just how far off the Lakers are from some of these young teams in the West. And OKC is a terrible matchup for anybody, but especially the Lakers with the youth, the athletes, the defense that they can put on the court. Really, any lineup that they have out there is going to be better athletically, certainly a lot younger than anyone the Lakers have on the court, and they're going to be way better defensively than anything that the Lakers can put out there. And it shows. I mean, the Thunder just ran them out of the gym. And I think it's pretty reminiscent of the Minnesota matchup in last year's playoffs, where, again, a young, hungrier team, maybe even at a talent deficit when you look at them compared to the Lakers, just kind of moonwalked past the Lakers in round one last year. Ant looked like the best player on the court in a series that had Austin Reeves, Luka, and LeBron out there all at the same time. So I just want to throw it out there that the Lakers, they at least had me interested that maybe the ceiling on them could be a lot higher. And maybe we just all forgot how damn good Luka is when he does have a great stretch of healthy basketball. And apparently the guy's single. He's had his own off the court stuff. Seemed to be skinnier than ever before. Single, skinny Luka was in full effect, and it's a bummer. But it does put LeBron in a really interesting spot, right? Where now he is shoehorned back into being an engine of a team that is currently the third seed in the West, and frankly, they have enough of a gap where, who knows? I don't really know what their schedule looks like down the stretch, but if they get a little light slate of tanking teams here, they could be in a really good spot to just hold that third seed, which makes them interesting and maybe still a little dangerous heading into the playoffs, depending on what that first round matchup is. And to see LeBron at age, like, what is he, 41, 42 at this point in time, be the number one option and the engine of a playoff team, if he can somehow make some noise and pull off a series win, that would open the door for both Luka and Austin Reeves to return. So who knows? I'm not totally ruling them out. I think it would be pretty far-fetched, and I must admit that if you look at the standings right now, the Lakers are again the 3 seed and the Timberwolves are the 6 seed. So that would be basically an identical matchup to last year's first round series, in which even this year with a better Lakers team, I would still probably take the Timberwolves, assuming both sides are healthy. So I really think they have no shot if that stays as a matchup with just LeBron kind of leading the charge out there. But I will throw it out there that if LeBron somehow does pull it off, it would make a return to the Lakers next year maybe more on the table for LeBron James, just because they did seem to hit their stride late in this regular season. LeBron also playing really well down the stretch. If he somehow pulls off a playoff series win, is he more inclined to return to the Lakers and return to be like a second or third option behind Luka and Reeves? I don't really know, but I just wanted to throw it all out there because it is big news. Again, Luka, Austin Reeves, both out at least through the end of the regular season, probably going to miss round one of the playoffs as well. So it's tough news for the Lakers, and their title odds fell quite a bit with the news this past week. Let's move on and talk about maybe the game of the year. I know I said a couple weeks ago that I thought Nuggets versus Thunder might have been game of the year, but could have been one-upped by Nuggets versus Spurs earlier today. We had Jokic versus Wemby going shot for shot. Unbelievable game. Highly encourage you guys to watch it back if you haven't already. The Nuggets ended up coming out on top 136-134 in overtime. Jokic obviously got the win, but also finished the game with 40 points, 8 rebounds, 13 assists, 3 blocks, and also had 0 turnovers on the game. Also had his signature Sombor shuffle. For those that aren't familiar, it's like that one-legged turnaround spin shot that he's had going for him for a while now, and kind of caught it around the free throw line. hit one of those spin jumpers over Wemby with just a minute left in overtime to extend the Nuggets lead, and also had the game-sealing bucket with 9 seconds left in the game, which was also a floater over Victor Wembanyama. Wemby, in his own right, he was unbelievable. 34 points, 18 rebounds, 7 assists, 5 blocks, and just 1 turnover for Wemby. So really, really high-level game of basketball from both of these guys. It was really special the amount of times that we actually got the Jokic on offense versus Wemby on defense matchup, right? Just seeing truly the best offensive player in the world versus the best defensive player in the world, and actually having it be like a fair fight and having that matchup play out several times throughout the game. I think this is like the second or third time the Nuggets and Spurs have played this season. So I know we saw it a few more times earlier in the year, but we did not get nearly as many Wemby versus Jokic like ISO matchups like we did earlier today. And both guys came out on top a fair number of times, right? Jokic had a couple times where, just in general, he could just move Wemby really wherever he wanted him to go, especially if the catch point was decent. Like a couple power dribbles into Wemby's chest, he's still giving up so much strength in that matchup that Wemby would just get moved. And a couple times, Jokic would score on him. A couple times, it just didn't matter. And Wemby blocked him at least twice in those situations, maybe even a third time. In general, I think I was probably more impressed with Jokic just leaning into that matchup. I would assume that Jokic would just pass out, try to find a better matchup, but the fact that he still has the confidence to score on anybody, I like to watch Jokic when he is being that aggressive. And it was just a statement win for a Nuggets team that's been really dominant as of late. It hasn't been the prettiest season for the Nuggets, and they have had some rough stretches, even as recently as post-All-Star break, where they were struggling for a bit, but now they're 9-1 in their last 10 games. They were still missing Peyton Watson in this one, who did re-aggravate his hamstring injury that's kept him out a while. So definitely not a good sign. Those hammy injuries are awful and have a really high chance of re-aggravation. But hopefully Peyton Watson still has the opportunity to come back and get a few more reps under his belt in the regular season before the playoffs. It was also a statement game for Jokic, who honestly could have seen himself fall all the way to 4th on the MVP ladder, depending on who you ask. Now he's at least 3rd with that Luka news, but there has been a huge banging of the drum for Wemby, who stated his own case to the media for MVP within the past week. Shea is obviously still probably the front runner for the award, and so he definitely needed that to kind of remind everybody that he still might be the best player in the world. And frankly, his defensive effort and mobility that we saw from Jokic were right back to where he was at the start of the season. I know I mentioned that he had regressed a little bit after that injury that he suffered, but he looks 100% back. Now, other random thoughts from the game, I'd say that Castle is like a legit star. It wasn't even that great of a good Castle game, but just since we're talking about the Spurs, he's comfortably their second best player. It was electric to see him and Wemby have their own version of the two-man game while taking on Jokic and Murray on the other side, right? Like Castle's obviously guarding Murray, Wemby's obviously guarding Jokic. Just seeing those two face off, on each end of the court was really exciting. Dylan Harper's been much better as of late. He's improved a lot as a shooter and just his overall production. And frankly, I think he's clearly the Spurs' sixth man heading into the playoffs, which is something that I called out earlier in the season for the Spurs to actually be considered title contenders. I feel like Harper has to be carrying himself more like a second or third year player. He can't be feeling like a rookie out there, even though he is still coming off the bench. And Keldon Johnson's been awesome for them, so it's not a foregone conclusion that he doesn't go right back to being the sixth man like what he's been for most of the year. But I think the best version of this Spurs team, Harper needs to be getting at least 20, 25, maybe even 30 minutes a game because of how talented he is. Now, this was also a great Cam Johnson game. There are signs of life from him today. He had a pretty huge 4-point play down the stretch as well. It was exciting to see him actually go to the basket a few times, not just sitting there camping out in the corner. The Spurs did intentionally leave Christian Braun open all game long, and that's part of the reason he finished with 21 points. But to his credit, he's kind of lucky that the game was at home, and he did find a way to make the Spurs pay for the strategy to leave him open, but he did play quite well. Now, it wasn't the best De'Aaron Fox game on the other side of the ball, but we know he can be up and down. And just in general, again, I really encourage you guys to go back, watch the highlights, watch some of that Jokic versus Wemby stuff. It was an incredible game, and I'm just praying we get this matchup in the playoffs. And I really don't think any team outside of the true contenders that we're going to talk more about in a second, I don't think any team that's not a real contender could even beat San Antonio in a single game right now. They've just been playing so well, and the 10 or 11 game win streak that they had going on was really impressive. So it was cool to see the Nuggets defend their home court and break that today. And again, we're just all hoping that we get some sort of rematch in the playoffs within the next few weeks. Now, before I let you guys go, I want to talk about the top tier in the NBA, the teams that I believe truly have a chance to win the NBA title. Now, I know I did this several episodes ago when I did my NBA tier ranking, and so if you guys want to listen to that back, you're more than welcome to. I just wanted to zoom out since we are in the home stretch of the regular season. The playoffs are basically upon us. I just wanted to kind of cut through the noise because there's a lot of teams out there that are playing well, on winning streaks, whatever. It's all good and fun, and I'm going to be excited for some upsets and whatever else happens in the NBA playoffs. But when it's all said and done, I'd be pretty shocked if it's not one of these teams raising a banner. I think especially in the NBA, with it being a 7-game series, it's really hard for the best team to not ultimately come out on top. And I do feel like we have a group of teams that's kind of levitating above everybody else that I want to spend some time talking about. Now, first team here, it's going to be the Oklahoma City Thunder. This should be a surprise to nobody. They're the defending champs. They've been the best team all year long. They're coming off a really dominant win against the Lakers, who were red hot at the time. Really a huge statement win for the Thunder to defend their home court. Go out there and just blow the doors off the old guys, or at least that's what it looked like. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games. Now, they did play poorly in Boston last week, which was also the best game of the year for my Celtics. I was obviously very excited to see that. Shea played awesome in that game. It just felt like the rest of the team, it was like a C- or below game from basically every other Thunder that wasn't SGA. Now, SGA is still my MVP. I do think it's close. I think there's some real arguments to be made for Wemby and Jokic, and it might come down to the final games. I think there's at least one or two more matchups that might be relevant for all those guys there. But I think we know what this team is. I do think that there are still some questions, despite how deep they are, despite how talented they are. It does feel like their late game offense is really predictable, right? It's all about Shea. It's all about him either creating his own shot or creating a shot for one of his teammates. And despite how talented they are, I feel like there are real question marks surrounding who is that second option and how good will they do. Jalen Williams was awesome for the Thunder during most stretches during the playoffs. He had some dud games out there where he could just kind of afford to disappear with how talented the team was. But he hasn't been the same guy this year. He's missed a ton of games. He's still a really young player. He's still working his way back from his most recent injury right now. He's had some highs. He had some lows like he did against the Celtics. So is it going to be Jalen Williams stepping right back into that number 2 role? Is it going to be Chet Holmgren, who has been largely healthy this season? He's made some strides in offense, maybe not as much of a leap as I and other people were expecting him to make, but he's still definitely young and improving. And then you have AJ Mitchell, a guy that might be the most improved player in the NBA, a guy that kind of came out of nowhere as a second-round pick and has just been unbelievable and honestly looks like a discount version of Shea when he's running the Thunder offense. I think one of those 3 guys any given night could be the guy that steps up, but they're going to need at least one, maybe even 2 of them to be great nearly every single game in the playoffs if they want to win those matchups. And so I do think it's kind of difficult for those guys to get their shots with them being so predictable and dependent on Shea in these late game situations. And I just wanted to call out there that I think the second and third options on the Thunder, at least offensively, are not as fleshed out as maybe some of the other teams in this contending tier, just because they've been able to get away with relying on Shea all season long. But obviously, we know what this team is, and we know that they deserve to be here. The second team that I want to talk about, the San Antonio Spurs, they are a lock in my contender tier at this point. Not a lot of experience here. You very rarely see a team that's never made the playoffs recently just step in and go all the way to the NBA title in their first year. But I think it'd be ridiculous to not have the Spurs on this list. I know that they lost today, but that loss snapped like a 10 or 11 game winning streak for the Spurs that were really impressive. Harper, like I mentioned earlier, has improved significantly, which was like the number one thing that I was looking for when it comes to the Spurs being a true title contender. Castle, who I talked about earlier, I believe he is a true star at this point in time. It's almost under-discussed how important De'Aaron Fox is for that team and the fact that he can just kind of float in and out of games, and every once in a while he'll just take over and be like, oh yeah, that's the guy that won Clutch Player of the Year or whatever a couple years ago during his best season with the Kings. And so it always comes ahead of schedule for generational players, right? And the Spurs definitely have one in Wemby. So even though they don't have any real playoff experience, I think that they could be the exception of the rule and go all the way. And the defensive impact of Wemby is just ridiculous. It feels like the minutes restriction that he's been on for most of the season is paying off. He did look pretty gassed at the end of the game today, whereas Jokic, his conditioning continues to be underrated. Like, he was just kind of fine out there the whole time, and Wemby was a little tired, but he's still out there. He's still playing. Really impactful, just definitely the best defensive player I've ever seen in my life. And offensively, he's making a ton of huge strides down the stretch as well. So third team in this tier that we need to talk about, that is going to be the Denver Nuggets. Again, talked about them a lot earlier. They're 9-1 in their last 10 games. Their defense was awful at times this season. It was a real roller coaster year that they've had so far. But getting Aaron Gordon back, getting Christian Brown back is a massive boost. They probably do need Peyton Watson to be at least 75, 80% of what he was at his peak earlier in the season. Like, I don't think they need Peyton Watson scoring 23 points a game like he was for several long stretches during the season, but he at least needs to be back and be as impactful as he was last year on defense for the Nuggets to be able to actually go all the way. But after I saw today, after what I saw from Jokic looking like 100% health after the injury that he had earlier in the season, Jamal Murray, who's quietly having the best season of his career, maybe the best season of Tim Hardaway Jr.'s career as well. He's been sneaky awesome for them off the bench all year long, and I've never been a big Tim Hardaway guy. Cam Johnson's improving. Like, all the signs are there for this Denver team. I mean, there was a lot of injuries throughout the year that we were just kind of envisioning what this Denver team might look like, and we really needed a dominant stretch at the end of the regular season to prove, hey, this Denver team still has it. Hey, they're still a contender. And I think that's exactly what we're looking at. And this win today really capped it off. Denver is obviously a contending team. And then finally, the last team in what I believe is this 4-team tier, levitating above everybody else in the NBA. We have to talk about my Boston Celtics. Surprise Celtics corner, whatever you want to call it. Here we are, talking about the Boston Celtics because I believe they are very well deserving of being the favorite to come out of the East. They're 8-2 in their last 10 games. Jason Tatum is already up to averages of 21 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists a game. He's already light years ahead of where he was his first few games back. He had 18 boards the other day against the Miami Heat, which was a very fun game for anyone that didn't watch. Really high scoring. Celtics shot the hell out of the ball. Honestly, the Heat did as well. I think the Celtics finished with like over 150 points. It was a really fun game. But again, 18 rebounds for Tatum in that one. He already seems like he's at his best as a playmaker and a rebounder already. Obviously, he has a few more levels to go just with his shooting percentages, which have taken a nice little jump lately. And also just his physicality, how willing he is to get to the basket and play through contact. I think those are like the last few boxes that he needs to check to get back to being 100%. But again, he's already way farther ahead than what he was Game 1, Game 2, Game 3 back from the injury. Need to talk about Jaylen Brown as well. I know he had a little slump right before Tatum came back where it felt like his style of play, the amount of shots he was taking, him carrying the offense like he was getting a little long in the tooth, right? Teams were kind of coming around on it. He was starting to be a little less efficient, but I think he's right back to playing at the same level he was to start the season, which is unbelievable. I think he's basically a lock for first team All-NBA at this point. Jaylen's been awesome. It feels like Tatum being thrust back into the lineup has taken a lot of the defensive pressure off Jaylen Brown, and he really rises to the occasions in big games, right? Like in that Thunder game, he was going toe-to-toe with Shea. He was guarding him down the stretch late in the fourth quarter, really taking pride in that assignment. And I do think Shea is obviously a much better player than Jaylen Brown, but in that game, it was kind of even between those two. And the fact that Jaylen Brown could levitate to Shea's level and actually kind of trade punches with him in a matchup that the Celtics really wanted to win in their home court was really encouraging to see. And then when you include guys like Peyton Pritchard, Derek White that have taken leaps offensively, mainly with Pritchard, right? Like I think he's gone to another level this season. You have 4 options of guys that can handle the ball and create their own shot on any given possession. And then in the middle of all this is Keita, who's been sneakily one of the best rim protectors in the entire NBA. He's such a beast, plays with so much heart. You know, the Vucevic loss after trading for him is tough because he's still dealing with that broken finger. That's a bummer, but Keita has been holding it down. He's been phenomenal as an energy big and somebody that's way outkicked my wildest expectations for him. And then you have Garza coming off the bench to provide those backup minutes and kind of be a discount version of Vucevic anyways. And that's kind of how I landed on Boston being here. I mean, I honestly thought that once that Cade injury news broke, that the Celtics were going to take the number 1 seed, which has not been the case because the Pistons have actually played really well without Cade Cunningham. So much respect to them for that. But it's pretty easy to see why Boston would be the heavy favorite to at least come out of the East, right? Like beyond that, I actually think that Boston is a worse team than the Thunder, than the Spurs, than the Nuggets. Like I wouldn't necessarily like our odds in any of those matchups. But if we're just talking about the team that deserves to be there because they are in the weaker conference, I feel like it has to be the Celtics because of the optionality of their offense, because of how consistently they've been playing all year long. And frankly, it feels like they're peaking at the right time. Jason Tatum has clearly made this team better right away. There's no awkwardness between him and Brown. There's no like, oh man, the offense looks different now and they're slightly less efficient. It's none of that. He's been purely additive because of his playmaking, because of his rebounding, and because of how well coached this team is. They're right there. And so that's why I'm choosing to cut the tier off at 4. Now, if you want to talk about the other teams that aren't in this tier that maybe have an argument, you have to start with Detroit. I just mentioned them. They are going to be the number 1 seed in the East, which I was surprised that they were able to maintain that position despite the fact that Cade Cunningham has a collapsed lung and is not playing basketball right now. But Dennis Jenkins has really stepped up in Cade's absence as the primary ball handler, being thrust in the starting lineup. He's been unbelievable. Jalen Duren has also even improved his production without Cade, which I was really surprised to see, just since he's, especially early in his career, was mostly just like a rim finisher and that type of player. But this year he's kind of proven that he's an all-NBA level center, which is really impressive. Now, despite the fact that they will still have the number 1 overall seed and they've had an awesome season, I can't get there with Detroit to be in that top tier any longer, just because I felt like they were a flawed team anyways with how reliant they were on Cade. Now, even if you want to put Dennis Jenkins in that tier where no, he can create his own shot and handle the ball and whatever else, that's fine, but they have 2 options at that point to do that. The Celtics have 4, the Cavs have at least 2 with Harden and Mitchell, and the Knicks have some options as well. I just think as you go down the list, I just think that there's other teams that have more ways that they can beat you offensively, especially at the end of a close game. The Knicks are just kind of a roller coaster. I do think there's an argument to be made for the Knicks to come out the East with them knocking off the Celtics last year, with them having a very consistent core in place. You can say whatever you want about that 5-man lineup that's been their starting lineup for a couple years now, but they know who they are. The 5 guys that are going to be out there, and I do feel like they're slightly deeper than what they've been in years past. I just think that they're so hot and cold and have all this drama around them. I couldn't quite get there on the Knicks. The Wolves are really inconsistent and have slid a little bit in the standings without Anthony Edwards, so I couldn't get there on them. The Lakers, we just talked about, they just fell apart injury-wise. The Cavs, it feels like they're kind of sandbagging to be the 4 seed and also lack some consistency. So it just didn't make sense for me to put any other team in this tier. But if you have a team that I left out and you're upset about it, let me know. But I feel like at the top of the standings, and one of these 4 teams I expect to win a title, and that's the Spurs, the Nuggets, the Thunder, and the Celtics. I think it's going to be one of those 4 teams, and we'll just have to see how the playoffs shake out. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I know it was a little bit all over the place, right? Had a lot of storylines, a lot of headlines to get to that I haven't had the opportunity to talk about for a couple weeks, so forgive me for that. But I will make up for it on my next podcast. I'm thinking about just doing my awards pod on the next one, which would be MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, all the major awards, all the defensive teams, all of my All-NBA teams, all that fun stuff. Always a fun podcast to do right before the playoffs. So I'm thinking of doing that on my next podcast, but who knows? We could have some other news that breaks. We could bring a guest on in the mix. You never really know what we have up our sleeves. But before I let you guys go, be sure to follow @WordsWithWallace on everything that includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to support the show on social media as well. Going to try to crank up the social media content a little bit as we head into playoffs. I know I've been saying that for a few weeks, but hopefully this will be the week to turn it all around. But make sure you're supporting Words with Wallace on social media as well. Again, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. Follow the show there. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.